The subject is games, which is a subject that I know quite a bit about because I spend a lot of time reflecting on failure. I'm not good at games, any kind of games other than crokinole. And I could spend a lot of time up here telling you a lot of stories about various times that games have gone wrong, that I've gone wrong in games, that things just haven't come together. But I thought it would be more interesting to tell you about one fairly memorable time for me when a game turned out really well, almost perfectly. And in order to do that, I have to go back to 1987. And I realized that there are people in the room who didn't exist in 1987. I assure you it happened. You can look it up on the internet. I don't have to look it up because I was there. I was in 5th grade in public school in Lindsay, Ontario. Any representatives? No. Okay, then I will go on to explain that Lindsay, Ontario is a cottage community, a town about 2 hours away from here. And this story takes place in June of 1987, that time of year when 5th graders get all sticky and whiny and bored and hot in the portable, and they really just want to be outside and on summer vacation. And so that is why I think our teacher, Mrs. Nelson, decided that she was going to take us on a field trip, unannounced, to Ken Reid Conservation Area. Ken Reid Conservation Area being a parcel of land set aside for nature things on the outskirts of the town with ponds and mosquitoes and trees and grass and all that. If you were a kid who grew up in Lindsay, at least in the 80s and 90s and probably still today, chances are you went on at least one field trip per year to Ken Reid Conservation Area to learn about science. But we weren't expecting this one. So as we rolled off the bus to get to Ken Reid, I think we discovered why we weren't expecting it, because Mrs. Nelson said, for a change of pace, we're not going to do a field trip, we're going to do a game of survival. This is how the game went. The class was divided into herbivores and carnivores, mostly herbivores. Each child was given a loosely fitting metal hoop to put around their neck and a tag to put on the hoop. Green for herbivores, red for carnivores. And they were all given names as well, although it was primarily just for dramatic purposes. So you were goshawk, or you were field mouse, you were garter snake. It didn't entirely matter as long as you knew you were herbivore or carnivore. All the herbivores had to do was run. And Mrs. Nelson lined them up, and she yelled, "Go!" And off they ran. They bolted into the woods. The carnivores had a different challenge. They had to catch the herbivores. And this game was effectively touch football. All you had to do was tap someone very lightly on the shoulder. Then they, obeying the rules of the game as they were told to do, would turn around and hand you the tag. Then they were dead. And if you were a good carnivore by the end of the game, which was on a time limit, you would have a number of green tags in addition to your red one on your hoop, so if you were a good predator. Now, I don't know what the educational value of this game was really. And looking back and coming from a family of teachers, I know that mostly Mrs. Nelson was trying to get us to blow off steam. But looking back also, I know that it was a very educational day for me and an important game for me because it taught me a wonderful lesson about absolute power. Because I wasn't a carnivore or a herbivore in this game. I was a natural disaster. And there were 3 natural disasters in this game. There was forest fire, me. There was flash flood, and there was plague, who was my friend Benji. Forest fire and flash flood did not have any tags around their neck. They could obviously kill anyone, being immense forces of nature and acts of God. And then they just put their own tags around their neck, Benji, the plague, was different. He had 2 yellow tags around his ring, which he could, when he killed somebody, he would then give them the yellow tag. They would be dead of the plague, but they could continue on handing the yellow tag to other people, thus infecting them, thus teaching us about germ theory, which in retrospect was really more like zombies, but it's 1987, so we don't make the connection, but you do. So anyway, this was quite a thing for me because, as I say, I have no skill or talent in games at all of any kind. I always lost things. And here was a game that, as far as I could tell, I could not actually lose in any way. Forest fire killed everything, and nothing killed forest fire. So all I had to do was stomp through the woods and catch anybody I could. I didn't have to have any particular strategy. There were enough kids you could just kind of run into one. And I didn't have to be defensive. I didn't have to think about, how to avoid anyone else. And so, I wiped out deer and mice and this and that. And, I barbecued a bear and I consumed a wolf. I unrealistically killed an eagle. It's going great. It's going great. But there was one animal, one carnivore, in particular, as the game drew to its quick close. This is like 6 minutes, you really have to move. There's one carnivore I couldn't find, and I'd really wanted to, and that was Megan the weasel. Megan and I had an old feud going back several grades. We'd all grown up together. In about grade 3, Megan was best friends with a girl named Belinda, and I had a crush on Belinda. Just unbelievable crush on Belinda. Megan knew this, and they were always hanging out together. So anytime that I would walk up to Belinda or walk by Belinda or be within earshot of Belinda, Megan would loudly announce that I had a crush on Belinda, which would force me to immediately, loudly, and firmly deny that I had a crush on Belinda, whom I had a crush on. So I'd always kind of resented Megan the Weasel for that. And so here it was, as I was coming toward the end of this, I look over and I see Megan in the not too great distance. She has her back to me. She's peeking around a tree, scoping a herbivore for the kill. And I thought to myself, here's an opportunity for a little bit of payback. So I sneak up behind her, tap her on the shoulder because I'm afraid of her. And she turns around and I figure, well, okay, this is going to be something where I can just, proudly hold out my hand, flaming hand, flames bursting off of my hand, palm up and say, give me that red tag. All the things you put me through, just give me that red tag. This is a little bit of revenge. But she just looked at me and she smiled. And I didn't know what to do because up to this point, everybody pretty much fallen before the conflagration, that was how it was. So summoning up the deepest, most booming voice that I could, which is what I thought fire sounded like, and I'm like, Megan, you give me that tag because that's the rules. Yeah, it's in 5th grade. We'll see how you sound in 5th grade. So Megan just smiles again with that sort of serene smile that drove me mad, and she said, Chris, I don't have to give you the tag. And she holds up a yellow tag and she says, I'm already dead of the plague. And that's exactly, somebody said, and I mean, that's exactly how I felt in that moment. I didn't know what to do. Here, it had been really just a nonstop victory up to this point. And here, the person I most wanted to consume with flame. So I tried to argue the point a little bit. I said, well, Megan, I mean, you've got the plague, but maybe you're just dying of it. Maybe... Because it could be coursing through you, you're dying fast, but the forest could still go up in flames while you're dying, and but she wasn't having any of it because she realized, as I did not realize, and as the game designers did not realize, that this was a loophole. So I was kind of futile about it, and then the whistle blew, and Mrs. Nelson was calling us back to the yellow bus, and she walked past me with a big smirk on her weasel face, and I felt that despite my other successes, I had failed on that day. So as I'm crawling, my embers doused, back to the bus, I tried to ask myself, is there any lesson I can really take from this? I was an introspective 5th grader. And at the time, I didn't have any, but in retrospect, I suppose the answer is that no matter how stacked the deck is in your favor, if you're not cunning, chances are somebody will eventually defeat you. And to put it more basically, you may think you're omnipotent, but you can still fail to perform. Thank you very much.